Nestled in a dazzling region of Florida, just outside Orlando and surrounded by lakes, lies a small, unassuming town. But don't let its quiet streets fool you. This place has long been a magnet for the unexplained. For over a century, Cassadaga has been known worldwide as a haven for spiritualists, mediums, and those who walk the line between the living and the dead. The town itself feels like a relic from another time. Quaint cottages line the roads, each one home to psychics, healers, and seers who've dedicated their lives to interpreting the unseen. But at the heart of it all stands the Cassadaga Hotel, a looming Victorian structure that seems to breathe with a life of its own. Built many decades ago, the hotel was meant to be a retreat for spiritualists seeking communion with the other side. But from the very beginning, there was something different about this place. Guests reported flickering lights, phantom footsteps, and reflections in mirrors that moved on their own. Some say the land itself is alive, pulsing with an energy vortex so powerful that even the most hardened skeptics have walked away believers. They describe it as a pressure in the air, a hum in the bones, a feeling of being watched by something just beyond sight. But the hotel's true horror lies in its stories. The disappearances, the voices in the night, the doors that shouldn't exist. Some say the spirits here aren't just lingering, they're waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right guest. So settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare to step inside the Cassadaga Hotel. Because tonight, you're going to hear the stories that still haunt its halls. Stories of terror, stories of madness, and stories of those who checked in but never checked out. Welcome to the haunting of Cassadaga. Are you ready to listen? The old-timers in southern Florida still talk about the Cassadaga Hotel in hushed tones. Most folks avoid the place now, letting the sun-bleached walls and sagging porch rot into the dust. But back in the 80s, it was different. Back then, people checked in, but some of them never checked out. I heard this story from a drifter named Harlan who swore on his mother's grave that every word was true. He wasn't the kind of man to spin ghost stories for whiskey, either. His hands shook when he talked about the place, like his bones still remembered the cold that clung to the hotel's halls. In the summer of 1983, a woman named Lydia Vale checked into the Cassadaga alone. She was a photographer, drawn to the Salton Sea's eerie beauty, and the hotel's peeling grandeur made for perfect shots. The clerk at the front desk, a gaunt man with yellowed eyes, handed her a key to room 17 without meeting her gaze. "Don't answer if you hear knocking," he muttered. Lydia laughed it off. Old buildings settle. Pipes rattle. But that first night, she woke to the sound of scratching, long, slow drags against her door like something testing the wood. When she flung it open, the hallway was empty. Just the scent of damp earth, thick as a burial shroud. The next morning, she found handprints on her bathroom mirror. Small ones, child-sized. By the second night, the whispers started. Lydia swore they came from the walls, murmurs just below hearing, like a radio tuned between stations. She pressed her ear to the plaster and caught a single, clear word, "Stay." Then came the giggling, high-pitched, gleeful, the kind of sound kids make playing hide-and-seek. But there were no children in the hotel. The clerk insisted she was the only guest. That's when Lydia noticed the shadows. They moved wrong, sliding along the baseboards when her back was turned, pooling in the corners like spilled ink. Once, she woke to the sensation of tiny fingers brushing her ankle. She screamed, kicking at the empty air, but the sheets were rumpled, as if something had been crawling beneath them. On her third night, Lydia couldn't take it anymore. She packed her bags, ready to flee, when she spotted it, a jagged hole in the wall behind the dresser, no bigger than a fist. Inside, the darkness pulsed, and then something blinked back at her. She stumbled back, heart hammering, but curiosity glued her in place. Slowly, she reached for her camera. When the flash went off, the thing in the wall hissed. The Polaroid slid out, developing in her trembling hands. The photo showed a face. Pale, sunken eyes, a mouth stretched too wide, and behind it, more of them, packed into the walls like roaches in a nest. Lydia ran to the front desk, shoving the photo at the clerk. The man didn't even flinch. "You shouldn't have looked," he sighed. Then he told her the truth. Back in the 50s, the Cassadaga wasn't a hotel. It was a tuberculosis ward. Dozens died there, coughing their lungs into rags. But the worst part? The children's wing. They'd walled up the contagious ones, left them to suffocate in the dark. Their bodies were never moved. "They don't like being alone," the clerk said, "so they bring folks in." Lydia didn't wait for dawn. She bolted for her car, keys jangling, but the engine wouldn't turn over. That's when she saw them. Small figures lining the hotel's windows. Watching, waiting. Harlan swore he met her years later in a diner outside Bakersfield. Her hair was white, her hands scarred with bite marks. She talked to herself, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. "They followed me," she whispered. "They're in the vents, in the mirrors. They remember me." Then she slid a Polaroid across the table. It showed a hotel room, her hotel room, and pressed against the glass of the bathroom mirror, a dozen small, grinning faces. The next morning, Lydia was gone, but the photo remained. And if you ask the right people, they'll tell you. Sometimes, late at night, the lights in the Cassadaga still flicker on, as if someone's checking in. The newlyweds arrived at the Cassadaga Hotel just after midnight, their headlights cutting through the thick desert darkness. Daniel had found the place online, a crumbling relic near the Salton Sea boasting a honeymoon suite for $29 a night. The photos showed cracked tile floors and furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s, but after splurging on courthouse wedding fees, it was all they could afford. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand as they stepped into the lobby, their shoes sticking slightly to the tacky linoleum. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic like old pennies. Behind a front desk, the night receptionist didn't look up from his newspaper. His name tag read Elias, and his skin had the sallow tone of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. "Checking in," Daniel announced, sliding their crumpled printout across the desk. Elias handed them a tarnished brass key with a tag that read Suite 13 without meeting their eyes. Emily frowned. "I thought we booked Suite 3. "Change of plans," Elias murmured, his gaze flickering toward the ceiling for just a moment. "You'll prefer 13. It's quieter." The elevator was out of order, so they took the stairs. The second-floor hallway seemed to stretch impossibly long, the vintage floral wallpaper peeling away in jagged strips like peeling skin. Their footsteps echoed, but beneath the sound, Emily could swear she heard something else, a faint scratching noise coming from inside the walls. When Daniel turned the key in Suite 13's lock, the door creaked open to reveal a space much larger than they expected. A sitting area with a moth-eaten love seat, a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in yellowed lace curtains. The air was thick and stale, as if the windows hadn't been opened in decades. Emily set her bag down on the dresser and froze. Someone had written in the dust coating the mirror above it, "Don't sleep." They laughed it off at first. Daniel poured cheap champagne into plastic cups, while Emily changed in her nightgown, trying to ignore how the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should be. The bed groaned when they climbed in, the sheets stiff with age. That's when the knocking started, 3 slow, deliberate raps against the headboard right behind Emily's pillow. Before either could react, the lights went out. Not a flicker or power surge, but an instant, total darkness, as if something had swallowed all the light. Then Emily felt warm breath against her ear as a child's voice whispered, "You're in our bed." Her scream shattered the silence. Daniel scrambled for the lamp, but the bulb exploded in his hand, sending glass shards slicing across his palm. Blood dripped onto the yellowed sheets as the room temperature plummeted. Above them, something heavy crawled across the ceiling with a wet, dragging sound. They didn't stay to see what it was. Back in the lobby, Elias still sat behind the desk, as if he'd been expecting them. Daniel's hand was wrapped in a bloody towel, Emily shaking so violently her teeth chattered. "We're leaving," Daniel snapped. Elias slid an ancient ledger across the desk without looking up. "Sign out first." Emily's breath hitched when she saw the page. Though they just arrived that night, their names, Emily and Daniel Vance, were already written in elegant script. Every other name on the page was crossed out in red ink, except theirs. "You can't leave once you're in the book," Elias said, smiling for the first time. His teeth were too white, too perfect. A woman emerged from the shadows of the lobby then, her gray-streaked hair pulled into a messy bun, a faded shawl draped over her shoulders. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "You saw them, didn't you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Emily could only nod. The woman, who introduced herself as Clara, a medium staying at the hotel, explained in hushed tones what Elias wouldn't. The Cassadaga hadn't always been a hotel. In the 1920s, it served as an asylum for incurables, children with deformities, mental illnesses, and diseases no one understood. "The fire killed most of them," Clara whispered, "but the ones locked in the basement, they starved to death when no one came to let them out." Daniel refused to believe it. "Ghosts aren't real," he hissed, dragging Emily toward the exit. But the lobby lights flickered violently, and all the door locks clicked shut simultaneously. That's when the real horror began. Thumps echoed from the ceiling above them. High-pitched giggles drifted up from the heating vents. The elevator, which had been broken for decades according to the out-of-order sign, suddenly whirred to life, descending from the third floor with unnatural smoothness. Clara grabbed Emily's wrist. They want a new family. They always take couples first. When the elevator doors creaked open, it was empty, but the stench of rot and spoiled milk poured out. Tiny, bloody handprints appeared on the lobby floor, leading straight toward them. They ran, up staircases that seemed to multiply, down hallways that twisted back on themselves, past doors that rattled as something pounded to get out. Clara finally pulled them into a supply closet, barricading the door with a mop bucket. "We have to break the tie," she panted. "They feed on fear. You have to stop being afraid." Daniel looked ready to argue, but Emily squeezed his hand. "Ow," she asked Clara. The medium pulled a vial of salt from her shawl. "We go back to Suite 13. We face them, and we send them on." The room had transformed in their absence. The wallpaper hung in shreds, revealing blackened plaster beneath. The mirror lay in glittering shards across the carpet. And the bed. The sheets moved as something small squirmed beneath them, giggling. Clara began chanting as she poured a salt circle around the bed. Daniel held Emily so tightly she could feel his racing heartbeat. Then the closet door creaked open. The thing that peered out was only vaguely childlike. Its skin stretched too tight over protruding bones. Its mouth split ear to ear in a grotesque smile. Milky eyes rolled wildly in its skull as it croaked, "Mommy." Emily's legs gave out just as the thing lunged. Clara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You are dead. You are lost. And you are not welcome here." The salt line flared white-hot. The creature shrieked as shadows peeled away from the walls like wet paper. For one terrifying moment, Emily saw them. Dozens of emaciated children with hollow eyes and grasping hands. Then the window exploded inward, not from outside but from within the walls themselves. A freezing wind howled through the room, dragging the wailing shadows out into the night. Silence. Dawn found them back in the lobby. Elias was gone. The ledger lay open to a blank page. Clara looked years older. "They'll be back," she murmured. "They always come back." This time, Daniel didn't argue. Months later, when Emily developed their honeymoon photos, she found one she didn't remember taking, a shot of Suite 13's bed with two small figures sitting on the edge, holding hands. On the back, in a child's scrawl, it read, "Next time, you'll stay." The job posting was handwritten on sun-bleached paper, taped to the Cassadaga Hotel's boarded-up front window. "Night cleaner wanted, no experience necessary, cash paid daily." Rachel Whitmore traced the letters with a chipped fingernail, the paper brittle under her touch. After 3 months living out of her '92 Honda Civic, the promise of indoor work and actual walls around her sounded like salvation, even if the place looked like it should have been condemned a decade ago. Elias, the night manager, had skin like old parchment stretched too tight over sharp bones. His nicotine-stained fingers trembled slightly as he handed her a ring of tarnished keys. "Second floor only," he wheezed, his breath smelling of menthol cigarettes and something faintly metallic. "Rooms 1 through 12. Bathrooms get bleach, sheets get changed if they're soiled." His yellowed eyes flickered toward the ceiling. "Basement's off limits. And if you see a door marked 13, you walk the other way." Rachel snorted, the sound too loud in the dusty lobby. "There is no room 13. I counted the doors when I came in." Elias didn't blink. "That's right," he said softly. "There isn't." The first week passed in a haze of ammonia fumes and flickering hallway lights. Rachel learned the rhythms of the decaying hotel, the way the pipes groaned at 2:17 a.m. exactly, how the elevator, permanently out of order, would sometimes shudder behind its brass gates as if something was trying to force its way out. She found strange things in the rooms. A single pearl earring left on a pillow, a child's drawing of stick figures with too many limbs tucked into Bible's pages, bathwater that remained inexplicably ice-cold no matter how long she let the taps run. On the 8th night, pushing her squeaky cleaning cart down the second-floor hallway, Rachel noticed something impossible. Where the hallway should have ended in a blank wall covered in peeling floral wallpaper, there now stood a door. A heavy oak door with a tarnished brass 13 hanging crooked from a single screw. The air around it smelled different. Not the hotel's usual mildew and cigarette smoke, but something earthy and sweetly rotten, like funeral flowers left too long in stagnant water. Rachel's fingers trembled as she reached for the knob. The metal was shockingly cold, so frigid it burned her palm. When the door creaked open, the room beyond looked frozen in some distant past. A lace canopy bed with yellow drapes. A vanity with a cracked mirror reflecting the room at wrong angles. A child-sized rocking chair moving slightly, though no breeze stirred the thick air. Her sneakers stuck to the floor with each step, peeling away with soft sucking sounds. The walls were papered in newsprint, pages upon pages of old missing persons notices, the dates spanning from 1923 to present day. Every face stared at her with ink-black eyes that seemed to follow her movement. Then she saw the photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard with rusted straight pins. Children in sepia tones, their faces blurred not from motion, but as if their features were melting like wax. A series showed a maid in a 1920s uniform standing beside the same canopy bed Rachel now faced, her expression growing progressively more terrified in each frame until her screaming mouth consumed her entire face. A floorboard groaned behind her. Rachel spun to see a girl of about 7 standing in the doorway. Her pinafore dress might have been white once, now stained the color of weak tea. Braids framed a face that would have been sweet if not for the eyes, black and depthless like the children in the photographs. "You're not supposed to be here," the girl said. Her voice sounded wrong, layered, as if multiple children spoke through her at once. "This is our room." Rachel's throat tightened. "I work here. I clean." The girl's head tilted too far to one side. "So did my mother." A small hand pointed to the last photograph on the board. The maid's face had completely liquefied now, dripping off the paper in thick, tarry streaks. She stayed too long. Now she's part of the room. The temperature plummeted. Rachel's breath fogged in sudden winter air. The dollhouse in the corner rattled violently, tiny plates and cups spilling from its miniature table. The rocking chair began moving faster, its runners thumping against floorboards that now pulsed like a living thing. "Run," the girl whispered, but her lips didn't move. The words seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through Rachel's bones. Rachel lunged for the door just as the photographs began bleeding, thick, dark liquid oozing from their edges, the children's melting faces turning toward her with mouths opening in silent screams. The walls bulged inward as if something pressed against the other side, the newsprint faces stretching into grotesque proportions. She hit the hallway at a sprint, her cart overturning with a crash. When she dared look back, room 13 was gone. Just a blank wall where the door had been, though she could still faintly hear the rocking chair's rhythmic creaking from somewhere inside. No one believed her. Not Elias, who found her hyperventilating by the service elevator. Not the bored sheriff's deputy, who took her statement between sips of convenience store coffee. Not the doctors at Desert Pines, who nodded sympathetically while adjusting her medication. They called it stress-induced psychosis, sleep deprivation, an overactive imagination fueled by the hotel's creepy atmosphere. The more Rachel insisted, describing the melting photographs, the impossible room, the little girl with a layered voice, the quicker they ushered her toward the special care wing. Now Rachel spends her days tracing the water stains on her padded room ceiling, following the patterns that sometimes look disturbingly like faces. The orderly who brings her meds won't meet her eyes anymore, not since she pointed out the tiny handprint on his clipboard, a smudge of something dark and sticky that hadn't been there before. Sometimes at night, when the asylum is quiet except for distant screams, Rachel hears faint giggling from the air vents. And once, when the moon was full and her window reflected the room behind her, she swears she saw a small figure standing by her bed, its features blurred and dripping, its hands outstretched as if waiting for her to join the game. The doctors say she's making progress, that soon she might be well enough for visitors. Rachel doesn't tell them about the letter that appeared under her pillow last night, a single yellowed photograph of the Cassadaga Hotel's front desk, with a new name neatly inked into the guest register in familiar, childish handwriting. Her name. The first thing Julian noticed when he pushed open the door to room 9 at the Cassadaga Hotel was the smell. Not the usual musty odor of old buildings, but something sweetly organic, like rotting flowers left in stagnant water. The air hung thick and heavy, resisting his movements as he stepped inside, his leather shoes sticking slightly to the tacky floorboards. He set down his worn leather bag, the one that had accompanied him to countless haunted locations across the country, and ran his fingers along the peeling wallpaper. The floral pattern seemed to shift under his touch, the vines twisting slightly as if recoiling from his presence. Julian had been a practicing medium for 23 years, ever since the dead fur started whispering to him when he was just 8 years old. He'd learned to distinguish between residual hauntings, mere echoes of the past, and the more dangerous intelligent spirits that lingered with purpose. As he unpacked his equipment, digital recorders, EMF meters, a jar of blessed salt, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching him from every shadowed corner of the room. The management had warned him when he checked in. The night clerk, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and yellowed fingernails, had studied Julian's reservation with a knowing smirk. "Room 9, huh?" he'd said, his voice like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "We get your type all the time. Ghost hunters, paranormal investigators." He'd leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of decay. "Most of them don't last the night." Julian had simply smiled. He wasn't some amateur with a cheap spirit box and a YouTube channel. He was the real thing, a man who could feel the dead like static electricity on his skin, who could hear their whispers in the spaces between heartbeats. But as he set up his equipment in room 9, he noticed something unsettling. The digital recorder kept malfunctioning, the display flickering erratically. The EMF meter spiked randomly, the needle swinging violently even when placed on seemingly inert surfaces. And the temperature, it fluctuated in impossible waves, creating pockets of Arctic cold that made Julian's breath fog one moment, then sweltering heat the next. That first night, the whispers began precisely at 3:17 a.m. Not the fragmented, half-heard murmurs of residual energy, but clear, deliberate voices speaking just below the threshold of normal hearing. Julian sat bolt upright in the sagging bed, his pulse hammering in his throat. The air had grown thick, almost gelatinous, resisting his movements as he reached for the bedside lamp. When a light clicked on, the bulb flickered wildly before bursting in a shower of glass, plunging the room back into darkness. Then the walls began to bleed. Not blood exactly, but a thick, tarry substance that oozed from cracks in the plaster, pooling on the warped floorboards with a sound like wet fingers dragging across glass. Julian's professional curiosity warred with primal fear as he watched the black liquid begin to take shape, forming skeletal hands that grasped at the air, twisted faces with mouths stretched in silent screams. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something far more dangerous, spirits that were aware, focused, and hungry. He lit a white candle with trembling hands, the flame casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to move independently of its light. "I can't hear you," he said aloud, his voice steadier than he felt. "Tell me what you want." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that Julian's joints ached with the cold. The black substance on the floor surged upward, forming more complete figures now, emaciated forms with elongated limbs and distended bellies. Their eyes, when they had eyes, were milky and unseeing, but their attention was fixed squarely on Julian. A child's voice giggled directly in his left ear, the breath frigid against his skin. He spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room and the growing sense that the walls were closing in. Then he felt it, a skeletal hand closing around his wrist with surprising strength, the fingers brittle but unyielding. The candle flame guttered wildly, the shadows swelling like a rising tide, stretching up the walls until they blotted out what little light remained. "Julian," the voices whispered, not from any particular direction, but from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the very air he struggled to breathe. "Julian, we've been waiting for you." The voices overlapped, merged, became a single, insistent hiss that vibrated in his bones. "Stay with us." He tried to pull free, but more hands emerged from the darkness, from the walls, from the floor, even from the ceiling above him. Dozens of skeletal fingers clutched at his clothes, his hair, his skin, their touch burning with unnatural cold. The candle went out with a hiss, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Julian gasped as the air was crushed from his lungs, as the hands dragged him backward with impossible strength. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was his own shadow on the wall. Only it wasn't following his movements anymore. It was waving at him, its fingers elongating grotesquely as it reached out toward him. Then nothing. When a morning maid came to clean the room, she found Julian's belongings neatly arranged on the bed, his digital recorder still running, his EMF meter displaying a steady, impossible spike. His leather bag was packed as if ready for travel, his wallet and phone placed carefully on top. Only the salt jar had been disturbed, its contents spilled in a perfect circle around the bed, the granules blackened as if burned. The hotel staff didn't report him missing. They were accustomed to guests who fled in the night, leaving their possessions behind. But if anyone had checked the registry the next evening, they would have noticed something peculiar. Julian's signature had faded almost completely, while a new entry had appeared beneath it in shaky, childlike script. Room 9, permanent guest, never leaving. And if they had listened very carefully outside the door late at night, they might have heard it, the faint sound of whispering voices, and among them, one that sounded distinctly like Julian's, pleading softly in the dark. Thomas Mercer had driven past the Cassadaga Hotel's broken neon sign a dozen times before finally pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot. The October storm had reduced visibility to near zero, and his GPS had been glitching for miles, showing his car icon driving through empty fields when he was clearly on the road. The last gas station attendant had warned him about the hotel with a strange gleam in his eye, saying folks check in, but they don't always check out, before bursting into wheezing laughter. The lobby doors stuck when he pushed them, requiring a hard shoulder shove to finally give way. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old cigarettes, mildew, and something underneath, like spoiled meat wrapped in floral perfume. The front desk was unmanned, but a brass bell sat waiting, its surface blackened with tarnish. When Thomas rang it, the sound echoed through the empty lobby with unnatural resonance, seeming to go on several seconds too long. From a back room emerged a man who moved all wrong. his limbs jerking like a marionette with tangled strings. His name tag read Elias, in faded letters, the plastic yellowed with age. Up close, Thomas could see the man's skin had a strange waxy quality, stretched too tight over sharp bones. His left eye didn't track with the right, staring off at some fixed point over Thomas's shoulder. "Reservation?" Elias asked, his voice sounding like it came from the bottom of a well. Thomas slid his credit card across the counter. "Mercer, just for one night." The clerk's fingers were unnaturally long as he took the card. The nails yellowed and curved like talons. The computer screen flickered as he typed, casting sickly green light across his sunken features. "Room 207, he finally said, sliding back a tarnished brass key attached to a heavy fob. "Third floor. Elevator's bin." He paused to cough violently into a stained handkerchief, out of service since the incident in '89. As Thomas turned toward the staircase, Elias added, "Ignore any knocking after midnight. And if you hear children laughing, well, best pretend you don't." The way his lips curled around the words made Thomas's stomach tighten. The stairs groaned under his weight, each step releasing puffs of dust that swirled in the dim sconce lighting. The wallpaper, once elegant floral patterns, now peeled away in jagged strips, revealing blackened plaster beneath that seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. At the second-floor landing, Thomas froze. A child's shadow darted across the far wall, though there was no one there to cast it. The temperature dropped suddenly, his breath fogging in air that now smelled sharply of ozone and wet earth. Room 207 was at the end of a hallway that stretched just a bit too long, the perspective subtly wrong like in a funhouse mirror. The key turned with difficulty in the lock, the mechanism grinding as if unused for years. Inside, the space was larger than expected, a sitting area with a moth-eaten love seat that seemed to exhale a puff of dust when he sat down, a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed with yellowed lace curtains that moved slightly despite the still air. Thomas noticed three things immediately. First, the framed photograph on the nightstand showed the hotel's exterior, but the windows in the picture were all broken, and dark figures seemed to press against the glass from inside. Second, the wallpaper behind the dresser bore a distinct human silhouette stain, as if someone had been pressed against it for a very long time. Third, and most disturbing, the room had no mirror, just an empty frame above the dresser with broken glass shards still clinging to the edges. That first night, Thomas woke to the sound of crying. Not from another room, but right beside his bed, a woman's sobs, so close he could feel the mattress dip as if someone sat there. His body locked in primal terror as the crying continued, the voice shifting between childlike whimpers and guttural, wet, choking sounds. When he finally found the courage to turn on the lamp, the light revealed an empty room, but the sheets on the other side of the bed were rumpled and damp, as if someone had just risen from them. The next morning, Thomas examined the room more carefully. The wallpaper stain had grown overnight, the silhouette now more defined. He could make out what looked like a woman with long hair, her mouth open in a scream. The bathroom mirror was still missing, but when he turned on the faucet, the water ran rust-brown for a full minute before clearing. And the shower drain. He could have sworn he saw dark hair swirling in it, even though he hadn't used the shower yet. Downstairs, the breakfast room was empty except for Elias, who stood unnaturally still behind the serving counter. The scrambled eggs in the chafing dish had turned green at the edges, and the orange juice smelled fermented. Thomas opted for black coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with ashes. "Sleep well?" Elias asked, his good eye tracking Thomas while the other remained fixed on the wall. Thomas hesitated. "There was someone in my room last night." Elias's smile revealed teeth too small for his mouth. "Just the housekeeper. She's quiet as a mouse." But when Thomas asked to see the guest registry, the page for yesterday was blank except for his own name. And beneath it, in shaky handwriting that hadn't been there before, someone had written, "Welcome home." That second night, the crying returned. This time, Thomas saw her, a woman in a tattered white nightgown, standing at the foot of his bed. Her face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, her dark hair stringy and wet as if she'd just climbed from a bath. Her lips moved soundlessly before she raised a skeletal finger and pointed at the wall behind him. When Thomas turned, he saw it. A door that hadn't been there before, made of dark oak with a tarnished brass knob, set into the wall where only peeling wallpaper had been earlier. The air around it shimmered slightly, like heat rising from pavement in summer. Against every screaming instinct telling him to run, Thomas approached the door. The knob was ice-cold in his hand, so frigid it burned his skin. When he turned it, the mechanism clicked with surprising ease. The door opened onto darkness. Not the ordinary dark of an unlit room, but something thicker, more substantial. A darkness that seemed to breathe. From within came a sound like distant whispering, dozens of voices overlapping in a language that made Thomas's teeth ache. Then the woman's voice whispered directly in his ear, her cold breath raising goosebumps on his neck. "Go inside. See what you've been running from." Thomas stepped through. The door clicked shut behind him with terrible finality. He stood in a hallway that resembled the Cassadaga's second floor, but everything was subtly wrong. The wallpaper pulsed slightly, the floral patterns shifting when he wasn't looking directly at them. The carpet was damp beneath his feet, squishing with each step and releasing a coppery scent that made his stomach turn. Most disturbing were the lights. The sconces flickered erratically, casting stuttering shadows that moved independently of their source. Between flickers, Thomas caught glimpses of figures standing just at the edge of visibility, their forms melting back into darkness when he turned to look. He spun around to find the door he'd entered through was gone, just solid wall where it had been. Panic clawed at his throat as he realized he was trapped in this nightmare version of the hotel. Then came the laughter, children's laughter, echoing from somewhere down the hall, high-pitched and gleeful, but with an undertone of something darker, a cruel, mocking edge that made Thomas's skin crawl. Against his better judgment, he followed the sound. The first door he tried opened into a perfect replica of his childhood bedroom. The same blue curtains his mother had sewn, the same baseball posters on the walls, even the same dent in the plaster where he'd thrown a toy truck during a tantrum. But the bed was occupied. A figure lay motionless beneath the covers. With trembling hands, Thomas pulled back the blanket to reveal himself. A younger version, maybe 10 years old, eyes wide and unblinking in death. The corpse's skin was waxy and pale, lips tinged blue. The dead boy's mouth opened with a wet cracking sound. "You remember this, don't you?" it whispered in Thomas's own childhood voice. The night you almost died? Thomas did remember. The fever that had spiked to 105 degrees when he was 9. The way his mother had sobbed at his bedside, begging him to hold on. The doctors saying it was a miracle he'd survived. The corpse's hand shot up and grabbed Thomas's wrist, the flesh cold and clammy. "You should have died that night," it hissed. "It would have been better for everyone." Thomas wrenched free and fled the room, slamming the door behind him. His heart pounded so violently he feared it might burst from his chest. Leaning against the wall to catch his breath, he felt the wallpaper shift beneath his fingers, something squirming just beneath the surface. The next door led to his old office from the job he'd lost 2 years ago. The desk was piled with unfinished projects, the computer screen frozen on an email from his boss. "We're letting you go. Your work hasn't met expectations." A figure sat in his chair, its back to him. Thomas didn't need to see its face to know it was him, an older, more broken version. The figure spun slowly to reveal sunken eyes and a mouth stretched into a rictus grin. "You could have fought harder," the figure said in Thomas's own voice, but distorted, as if played through a damaged speaker. "But you gave up, like you always do." The office walls began to bleed, thick black liquid oozing from the seams where the walls met the ceiling. The substance dripped onto the carpet with a sound like fat sizzling in a pan. Thomas backed out of the room just as the figure began to rise from the chair, its limbs moving in jerky, unnatural motions. The hallway seemed longer now, the doors spaced farther apart. Each one led to another painful memory, another failure. His wedding day. Except his bride's face was a featureless blank, her voice accusing. "You never really loved me." You just didn't want to be alone. His father's funeral. Except the corpse in the casket had Thomas's face. And when he leaned in to look, its eyes snapped open, black and endless. Every door was another piece of his life, distorted and grotesque. Each memory turned against him. The children's laughter followed him through the halls, growing louder with each step. "Come play with us, Thomas. Stay with us. You belong here." The air grew thicker as he stumbled through the nightmare hotel, until each breath was a struggle. His limbs felt weighted down, as if he were moving through water. At the end of the hall, the woman in the white nightgown waited for him, her hollow eyes tracking his every movement. She led him to the lobby, a twisted mirror of the one he'd entered through earlier. The furniture was decayed, the carpet stained with dark patches that might have been blood. Behind the front desk, the guest ledger lay open, its pages filled with names, some crossed out, others glowing faintly as if written in phosphorescent ink. The woman ran her fingers over the pages. "You see now, don't you?" she asked, her voice like dry leaves scraping against stone. "This is your hotel, your memories, your hell." Thomas fell to his knees, his strength finally giving out. He was so tired, tired of running, tired of failing, tired of the constant weight of his own regrets. The children found him like that. Small hands tugged at his clothes, his hair. Their faces were pale and sunken, their smiles stretching too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "You can stay," they whispered in unison, their voices harmonizing in an eerie chorus. "No more pain, no more regrets, just sleep." One of them pressed something into Thomas's hand. The room key for 207, now rusted and pitted with age. Thomas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was sitting behind the front desk, the guest ledger open before him. His fingers, now skeletal and yellowed, held a fountain pen that dripped black ink like blood. A new entry glistened on the page, written in his own handwriting, but with an elegance he'd never possessed. "Thomas Mercer, permanent guest, never leaving." The children laughed as the hotel absorbed its newest resident, his form slowly fading into the wallpaper, becoming just another shadow in the Cassadaga's long, dark history. Back in the real world, the maid found room 207 empty the next morning. Thomas's suitcase was still there, his clothes neatly folded. His wallet and keys sat on the dresser, undisturbed. But the wall where the strange door had been was smooth and unbroken, the wallpaper pristine as if it had just been replaced. And if you press your ear to that wall late at night, when the hotel is quiet and the shadows grow long, you might hear something whispering, laughing, and beneath it all, the sound of man sobbing quietly in the dark. Waiting, always waiting for the next guest to invite inside. The Paranormal Pursuit crew's van sputtered to a stop in the Cassadaga Hotel parking lot as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the decaying Victorian facade. Jake Reynolds, the team's charismatic frontman, killed the engine with exaggerated relief, immediately adjusting his GoPro settings. The red recording light blinked to life, casting an eerie glow across his stubble-shadowed face. "All right, ghost hunting fam," Jake announced in his signature YouTube voice, panning the camera across the hotel's crumbling exterior. "We're here at the infamous Cassadaga Hotel, where according to local police reports, at least 17 guests have mysteriously vanished since 1973. He zoomed in on a boarded-up third-floor window where the wood splinters seemed to form a screaming face. But let's be real, this place probably just has a serious code violation list and an overactive imagination from the locals. Lexi Monroe, Jake's girlfriend and co-host, flipped down the visor mirror to check her lip gloss, the vanity lights casting unnatural shadows across her carefully contoured face. "I give it 2 hours before we debunk this whole most haunted hotel in America nonsense," she said, popping her gum. "My money's on faulty wiring, raccoon infestations, and one very creative night manager." Mark Bishop, their long-suffering producer and tech expert, groaned as he hauled their heavy equipment cases from back. The cases were covered in stickers from previous investigations, most crossed out with "debunked" in angry red letters. "I'm just saying," he adjusted his glasses, the lenses reflecting the hotel's flickering neon sign. If we get one more haunted location that turns out to be nothing but bad plumbing and loose floorboards, I'm invoicing Jake for these travel expenses. The lobby doors resisted their push, the swollen wood requiring all three to shove together. When they finally burst through, the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees. The air hung thick with the scent of old cigarettes, mildew, and something sweetly organic underneath, like funeral flowers left to rot in stagnant water. The front desk stood unattended, but a tarnished brass bell sat waiting on the cracked marble counter. When Jake rang it, the sound echoed unnaturally through the empty space, the chime reverberating several seconds longer than physics should allow. From a back room emerged a man who moved all wrong, his limbs jerking like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. His name tag read Elias in faded letters, the plastic yellowed with age. Up close, his skin had a strange waxy quality, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His left I didn't track with the right, the milky orb fixed on some distant point over their shoulders. "Reservations?" Elias asked, his voice sounding like it came from the bottom of a rusted oil drum. Jake flashed his most charming grin for the camera. "Yeah, with a paranormal pursuit team here to investigate your famous ghost stories." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Maybe get some actual proof instead of all those faked videos online." Elias's fingers were unnaturally long as he took Jake's ID. The nails yellowed and curved like talons. The ancient computer screen flickered sickly green as he typed, illuminating the deep hollows beneath his eyes. "Room 13, he finally announced, sliding 3 tarnished brass keys across the counter. Each key had an odd sticky residue that clung to their fingers. "3rd floor, elevator's bin." He paused to cough violently into a handkerchief that came away stained black, out of service since the incident in '89. As they turned toward the grand staircase, Elias added in a voice that made the hairs on Lexi's neck stand up, "Ignore any knocking after midnight. And if you hear children laughing, well, best pretend you don't." The way his lips stretched around the words revealed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. The stairs groaned under their combined weight as they climbed, each step releasing puffs of dust that swirled in the dim sconce lighting. The wallpaper, once elegant damask patterns, now peeled away in jagged strips, revealing blackened plaster beneath that seemed to pulse when viewed from peripheral vision. At the 2nd floor landing, Mark suddenly stopped dead, his face draining of color. "Did you guys see that?" he whispered, pointing to a doorway down the hall. Lexi turned, her designer bag slipping off her shoulder. "See what? A kid. I swear I just saw a kid in old-fashioned clothes run past that doorway." Mark's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. He was missing the bottom half of his legs. Jake laughed and zoomed his camera toward the empty hallway. "Dude, we're literally the only people checked in tonight," Elias said so when we arrived. But even Jake's voice lacked its usual confidence as the camera's night vision revealed dozens of small handprints glowing on the wallpaper, prints that hadn't been visible to the naked eye. Room 13 waited at the end of a hallway that stretched just a bit too long, the perspective subtly wrong like in an M.C. Escher drawing. The key turned with difficulty in the lock, the mechanism grinding as if unused for decades. Inside, the space was larger than expected, a sitting area with a moth-eaten love seat that exhaled a puff of dust when Jake sat down. A bedroom with 2 double beds sporting yellowed lace canopies that moved slightly despite the still air, and a bathroom where the mirror had been completely covered by a stained bedsheet nailed to the wall at odd angles. Mark immediately noticed 3 disturbing details that he recorded in his investigation notebook with shaking hands. First, the framed photograph on the nightstand showed the hotel's exterior, but the windows in the picture were all broken, and dark figures seemed to press against the glass from inside, their faces distorted in silent screams. Second, the wallpaper behind the dresser bore multiple human silhouette stains at different heights. The outlines growing progressively more distorted the higher they went, as if something had been changing shape as it pressed against the wall. Third, and most unsettling, the room had no closet, just a bare wall where one should have been, with deep gouges in the floorboards suggesting something heavy had been dragged away recently. Jake set up their equipment with practiced efficiency. 3 stationary infrared cameras covering different angles, EMF meters on each nightstand, a digital recorder placed strategically near the most stained section of wallpaper. Lexi flopped onto one of the beds dramatically, then immediately sat back up when a mattress emitted a wet, squelching sound. "Wow, so scary," she said in a mocking tone, waving her hands like a bad actor in a B-horror movie. "Oh, it's the ghost of terrible housekeeping." Her forced laughter died in her throat when the EMF meters all suddenly spiked simultaneously. Mark frowned at the readings. "That's impossible. We're getting consistent spikes near the bed, but there's no electrical wiring in that wall." He tapped the device, which now showed levels that should only appear near power stations. This shouldn't be physically possible. Jake grinned and turned the camera on himself, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You hearing this, viewers? Already getting some insane readings in our first 10 minutes. Let's see if the Cassadaga ghosts want to come out and play." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. They ordered pizza from the only place that delivered to the hotel, their nervous laughter echoing too loudly in the cavernous room. As they ate, Jake opened their Spirit Box app, the white noise hissing through his phone speaker like a living thing. "If there are any spirits here with us," he said in an exaggerated, serious tone that rang hollow in the heavy air, "give us a sign of your presence." The response was immediate and violent. The lights flickered wildly before exploding in a shower of glass, plunging them into darkness. From the bathroom came the distinct sound of the shower turning on full blast, the pipes groaning like something was forcing the water through against tremendous pressure. The temperature dropped so rapidly their breath fogged in the air, and the Spirit Box app suddenly blared to life with a guttural voice cutting through the static. "Get out." All 3 jumped. Lexi's scream was cut short as she clamped a hand over her own mouth. Jake's hands shook as he checked his phone. That wasn't part of the app's programming. His voice was barely above a whisper. Then the knocking started, not from the door, from inside the walls. A slow, deliberate knock. Knock moving around the perimeter of the room, as if something large were testing the structure from within. The sound was wet, like meat slapping against concrete. Mark checked the EMF meters. All 3 were now maxed out, their displays flashing red warning symbols. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "These readings are beyond anything we've ever seen." His fingers left sweaty smudges on the screen as the devices began emitting a high-pitched whine that set their teeth on edge. Jake, ever the showman, forced a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "All right, very funny. Elias must have rigged something up to scare us." He turned to the empty corner of the room where the shadows seemed somehow darker. "You got us, man. Good prank." His voice cracked on the last word. The room answered. The temperature plummeted so fast their exposed skin burned with the cold. The Spirit Box app screamed to life again, multiple voices overlapping in a cacophony of pain and rage. "Not prank. We see you. Stay with US. You're ours now." Lexi's hands flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God." Her whisper was barely audible over the growing static. Then the laughter started. Children's laughter coming from under the beds and inside the walls. High-pitched and gleeful, but with an unnatural echo, like a recording played backward at half speed. The sound was punctuated by wet, tearing noises that made Mark's stomach lurch. Mark was already shoving equipment into bags with trembling hands. "We need to leave. Now." His voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. Jake hesitated, torn between primal fear and the potential for viral content. Just a few more minutes. We need to get this on camera." Even as he spoke, his eyes darted toward the door. As if responding to his words, the sheet covering the bathroom mirror suddenly slid off the wall with a wet tearing sound, revealing a mirror completely fogged over with condensation. Words slowly appeared as if an invisible finger was writing them in the steam. "You shouldn't have mocked US." The letters dripped red, streaking down the glass like blood. Lexi screamed, for real this time, the sound piercing through the growing static. All three bolted for the door, but it refused to open no matter how hard they pulled. The knocking in the walls grew louder, more insistent, until the plaster began to crack. Small, pale fingers poked through the gaps, scrabbling at the edges like insects testing their confines. The lights came back on with a surge that blew out two of their cameras in showers of sparks. The remaining one captured the horror unfolding in shaky detail. The bedsheets were moving as if something large was crawling beneath them, the fabric stretching obscenely over unseen forms. The wallpaper was peeling itself away in strips, revealing blackened flesh-like material beneath that pulsed with a sickening rhythm. Worst of all, the wall where the closet should have been was now visible. A massive, blood-stained door that hadn't been there before, its handle turning slowly with a rusty squeal. Mark threw himself against the main door with all his weight. It finally burst open with a sound like tearing meat, sending them tumbling into the hallway. They didn't stop to look back as they ran for the stairs, but the camera still rolling in Jake's hand captured the fleeting image of dozens of small, pale figures crawling out of room 13 after them. Their limbs moving in impossible, jerky motions, their mouths stretched too wide in rictus grins. The stairs became a nightmare maze, twisting back on themselves no matter which direction they ran. The hallway stretched impossibly long, doors slamming open and shut as they passed. From every room came sounds of laughter, crying, and wet, tearing noises they didn't want to identify. The air grew thick with the scent of copper and rotting meat, making their eyes water and their stomachs churn. When they finally burst through the lobby doors into the parking lot, they found their van wouldn't start. The hotel's exterior lights flickered erratically, casting stuttering illumination on the dozens of small handprints that now covered the vehicle's windows, prints that glistened wetly in the dim light. They ran on foot to the diner across town, too terrified to speak about what they'd experienced. The next morning, in the cold light of day, they returned to collect their equipment. Room 13 appeared completely normal. No cracks in the walls, no mysterious door, no writing on the mirror. Even their cameras showed only static for the entire haunting. The night manager, a different man from Elias, claimed they were the only guests who had stayed that night. But when they reviewed the footage back at their studio, they discovered something impossible. The static wasn't random. If you turned the volume all the way up, you could hear whispers in the white noise. Hundreds of them, all speaking at once in a language that made their ears ache. And in certain frames, if you advanced slowly, you could see shapes moving in the snow, gaunt faces pressing forward, skeletal hands reaching out toward the lens. The last video uploaded to Paranormal Pursuit was a 47-second clip titled The Truth. It showed brief, fragmented shots of their ordeal, the writing on the mirror, the moving bedsheets, the hallway that wouldn't end. The audio was a distorted mix of their screams and that terrible children's laughter. The final frame was a close-up of Jake's face, his mouth sewn shut with black thread, his eyes wide with unspoken terror. Then the screen cut to black with a single line of text. "We tried to warn you." The channel never updated again. Their social media went dark. Emails to their production company bounced back. But guests at the Cassadaga Hotel sometimes report seeing three figures standing in the third-floor window of room 13, two men and a woman. Their faces pressed against the glass like they're screaming soundlessly. And at exactly 3:17 a.m. each night, the old television in the lobby turns on by itself, showing nothing but static, and occasionally brief glimpses of figures moving in the snow. If you listen very carefully when staying there, you might hear the faint sound of camera shutters clicking in the dark. Still recording. Still streaming. Forever. The land where the Cassadaga Hotel now stands had been whispering long before the first foundation stone was laid. This patch of earth had drawn the attention of mystics and mediums for generations. The locals always spoke of it in hushed tones, warning settlers of a thin place, where the barrier between worlds grew fragile as aged parchment. Early pioneers reported strange phenomena. Will-o'-the-wisps that danced between the trees without fire, disembodied voices that called their names in the dead of night, and an overwhelming sensation of unseen eyes watching from the empty air. Some claimed the very trees here grew twisted, their branches curling inward like skeletal fingers clutching at something unseen. When the original owner purchased the land in 1889, he did so with full knowledge of its reputation. After the tragic death of his wife during childbirth, he'd become obsessed with contacting the other side. Mediums whispered that this particular plot of land held unparalleled psychic energy, a natural conduit to the spirit world. Construction began, but trouble started before the first foundation was dug. The initial crew quit after just 3 days, their foreman muttering about bad earth and refusing to elaborate. The second crew lasted a week before departing under cover of darkness, leaving their tools behind. The third crew, comprised mostly of immigrant laborers who couldn't afford to be particular about work sites, would be the ones to break ground and uncover the land's dark secret. Among them was Samuel Grayson, a quiet but skilled mason from Missouri. Unlike his superstitious co-workers, Samuel was a practical man who scoffed at their whispered fears. "Ghosts don't pay the bills," he'd say, spitting tobacco into the dirt. On the morning of June 17th, 1890, Samuel's pickaxe struck something that shouldn't have been there, a smooth stone slab buried just 3 feet below the surface. As he cleared away the dirt, strange symbols became visible, carved deep into the rock. They resembled no language any of the workers recognized. Not Native American, not Spanish, nothing from the old world. The foreman, a grizzled veteran of dozens of builds named Hank O'Malley, ordered the men to pry up the slab. What they found beneath would haunt them all. A circular chamber, about 8 feet across, its walls lined with handprints, dozens of them, in various sizes, all burned black into the stone as if seared by tremendous heat. The floor was littered with animal bones, rusted iron chains, and what appeared to be human teeth. Most disturbing was the altar at the center, a flat stone dais stained a deep, unnatural red that no amount of weathering could explain. O'Malley immediately ordered the chamber filled in, but Samuel lingered after the others had left. Later, he would tell the foreman he'd heard something, a wet, rhythmic sound like something large breathing from deep within the earth. That night, Samuel didn't return to the workers' camp. When they found him at dawn, he was curled in the fetal position at the bottom of the now-covered chamber, his body twisted at impossible angles. His mouth was stretched wide in a soundless scream, his eye sockets empty, not gouged out, but seemingly dissolved, leaving behind only smooth, wet hollows. His tools were neatly arranged around him in a perfect circle, their metal surfaces pitted and corroded as if aged decades overnight. The coroner from Orlando ruled it a cerebral hemorrhage, but the workers knew better. Half the crew quit on the spot, crossing themselves as they fled. Holloway, ever the pragmatist, doubled wages for those who stayed and brought in a new batch of laborers. The chamber was sealed beneath tons of concrete. The hotel's foundation poured directly over it. But the land, it seemed, had not forgotten the disturbance. As construction continued, strange occurrences became commonplace. Tools would disappear overnight, only to be found in impossible locations, buried in freshly poured concrete, suspended high in unfinished rafters, or sometimes simply gone without trace. Workers reported feeling unseen hands plucking at their clothes, hearing whispers in languages no living man should know. One laborer swore he saw Samuel's ghost standing in the half-built lobby, his hollow eyes weeping thick, black tears. When the Cassadaga Hotel finally opened its doors, there were incidents from the very beginning. Guests reported waking to find their bedsheets soaked with water that smelled of the sea, though the ocean lay miles away. Others claimed their reflections in the full-length mirrors would sometimes continue moving after they'd stopped. Seances held in the grand parlor often produced astonishing results. Rappings that shook the walls, phantom winds that extinguished every candle simultaneously, voices speaking in tongues no linguist could identify. But the most persistent presence was Samuel. Staff reported seeing a man in workman's clothes, denim overalls stained with lime mortar, a battered wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, standing at the foot of beds or sitting quietly in corner chairs. He never spoke, but his presence carried a weight, a density to the air that made it hard to breathe. Those who got close enough to see beneath the hat's brim wished they hadn't. The hollow sockets where his eyes should be wept to thick, tarry substance that smelled of turned earth and rusted iron. The first confirmed death attributed to supernatural causes occurred when renowned medium Eleanor Voss locked herself in room 18 for what she claimed would be the most important seance of her career. When she failed to emerge after 3 days, staff forced the door. They found Eleanor's corpse kneeling before the full-length mirror, her palms pressed flat against the glass, as if trying to push through. Her lips had been neatly sewn shut with black thread that no one could identify. Not silk, not cotton, but something organic that pulsed slightly when touched. Above her, scratched deep into the wallpaper, were the words, "Samuel says hello." In the decades that followed, the Cassadaga Hotel became both Mecca and cautionary tale for paranormal investigators. The phenomena grew more brazen, more dangerous. Guests reported finding doors in their rooms that hadn't been there before, always made of dark oak, always with a tarnished brass knob that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. Those foolish enough to open them described stone passages leading downward, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and rotting meat. Some heard what sounded like massive lungs expanding and contracting in the dark. Others claimed to hear Samuel's voice whispering from just beyond sight, "Come see what I found down here." None who entered those doors were ever seen again. Not whole, at least. Housekeepers would sometimes find strange souvenirs left behind. A single shoe filled with wet earth, a wedding ring fused to a fragment of jawbone, a pocket watch stopped at 3:17 with its glass face cracked in a perfect spiral pattern. In 1972, the hotel's night clerk Harold Jenkins disappeared after 30 years of uneventful service. All that remained was his journal, its final entry dated that very night. Samuel isn't trapped here. He's the doorman. He lets them in. And once you hear his voice, you're already marked. The chamber wasn't empty when we found it. It was waiting. It's always been waiting. The concrete didn't seal it away. It just made it angry. I can hear them scratching at the walls now. They're almost through. God help whoever turns that key tomorrow night. Today, the Cassadaga Hotel still stands, though its grandeur has faded into something more sinister. The electricity flickers unpredictably, often cutting out completely at 3:17 a.m. Guests report waking to find their beds surrounded by wet footprints that smell of freshly turned earth. The mirrors sometimes reflect rooms that don't exist, filled with figures that move just out of sight. But the most infamous phenomenon remains the voice, a soft, rasping whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Some hear it when they first unlock their room door. Others report it waking them from deep sleep. Always the same words, spoken in a tone that might almost be cheerful, if not for the way it makes the blood freeze. Welcome to the Cassadaga. We've been waiting for you. And if you listen very, very closely in the dead of night, when the hotel holds its breath between creaks and groans, you might hear something else beneath Samuel's voice, something vast and hungry stirring in the dark beneath the foundation, waiting for the next door to open, waiting for the next guest to invite it in.